regular attender at the Byron Bay Writers' Festival. The chances are you're not here. The chances are you're across the road over there in the old site waiting for it to be washed away by the sea. We thought we'd preempt that, and because the university's tagline is a new way to think, this is the new way to think. You've got to turn left as you come out of bar and not turn right. So that's the first thing. So you have all successfully navigated that, and I congratulate you on it. The university is always delighted to support the Byron Bay Writers' Festival because there's such a logical link between a university and writing. It's what we think we're all about. And in that sense, we have a very clear and ongoing connection. My pleasant task today is to introduce Geoffrey Robertson, and prior to that I'm going to introduce this empty chair. This is a pen chair. It is the chair to recognise the writers who could not be here or in other ways have been taken out of the whole writing arena. Today we want to recognise Guo Chan, who's an internet writer, an activist and an associate professor, now banned from teaching at Nanjing University in China. In May 2008 he was imprisoned for 10 days for violating public order, and in December 2008 he was charged and detained for the subverting of state power, and he hasn't been seen since. That just reminds us that writing is something really special and really strong. One of the pleasures of being Vice-Chancellor of Southern Cross University, and I disappear in about 3 weeks today as that, is to introduce the prime guest speaker for the Byron Bay Writers' Festival. And it's a real pleasure today to be able to introduce Geoffrey Robertson. And I want to say first off, this is real, this is not hypothetical, he is actually here. Geoffrey is one of those Australians who's discovered that if you live on the other side of the world you get to fly a lot. Geoffrey's frequent flyer point count is probably approaching the national debt in points. So we are particularly pleased, I think, that he's taken time from what is enormous family trauma over the last few days to be here, or wisely, he was nowhere near where the family trauma was. The family trauma is that Geoffrey has a 16-year-old daughter who's going through the General Certificate of Secondary Education examinations just at this moment. And those of us who have or don't want 16-year-old daughters, then let me tell you, there are some places you just don't want to be. There are two important authors in Geoffrey's life. The first is John Mortimer. You may recall Rumpole of the Bailey, that irascible Leo McKern. In fact, you can only get irascible like that if you're an Australian in London. John Mortimer created a wonderful character there, but John was an active barrister and he had his own chambers, and one of the early entrants to those chambers was Geoffrey Robertson. And so there is, if you like, some of the seeds of, I'm sure, what Geoffrey has done since that have derived very strongly from John Mortimer. The other writer in Geoffrey's life is a bit more present and in your face, in a sense, and that is Kathy Lett. Kathy Lett is Geoffrey's husband, wife. I knew I was going to get it wrong. I could hear it, just hear it coming. Partner was too weak. Anyway, it's the woman that he shares his house with. Let me run it that way through. And Kathy herself is a writer, as many of you will know, in a slightly different genre than Geoffrey's. Geoffrey's genre has produced a whole range of wonderful titles, and the most recent one is The Statute of Liberty, How Australians Can Reclaim Their Rights, because a consistent theme of everything Geoffrey's done through his life is about human rights and the rights that can derive from that. But he's also a bit of a history buff too, and his more substantive in size recent book is Tyrannicide Brief, which is essentially how Cromwell's lawyers managed to produce the first trial of a head of state in the globe, and that head of state was Charles I. Geoffrey has been working subsequently to to have a few more heads of state in that sort of a circumstance. And if anybody can do it, then I think Geoffrey can. Kathy, of course, is a writer. She too writes books with titles, and they're the sorts of titles that if I were married to her would I think was putting me on notice. The current one is How to Kill Your Husband and Other Handy Household Hints. Soon to be followed by To Love, Honour and Betray, Till Divorce Us Do Part. So you can imagine the joy of the breakfast table in the Robertson household as Geoffrey tries to figure out whether there's a title that he can use that has the gravitas that you need for what he writes, but sends its own message. Let us send our own message to Geoffrey. Let's invite him to the stage and to speak with us this morning.
Thank you, Paul, for that relatively kind introduction. And thank you for inviting me to Byron, my first visit. On this warm winter morning, there are whales in the bay, there are whipbirds in the gum tree, there are quolls in the undergrowth before they get run over by the Repco rally. One lady was kind enough to informed me by email of her intention to dress up as a spotted-tailed quoll. "Don't be alarmed," she said, "if I jump out and embrace you." Well, I wasn't. I'd never heard of a quoll. But then I read up on them to discover that they're famous in the marsupial kingdom for the fact that they have sexual intercourse for 8 hours. During which time the female of the species does not move. Then it suddenly turns round and bites off the head of its male partner. So I'm very alarmed. I'm ashamed I've never made it to Byron. I come back to Sydney every year to see my dentist and my urologist. In and out, so to speak. But I've never made it this far north, other than flying over Byron and spotting the lighthouse. I spent my school holidays on the Manning River, where my grandparents had retired. Port Macquarie was quite a dangerous and distant trip in the days when the Pacific Highway was a one-lane death trap. It's now a four-lane death trap. But Coffs Harbour really was the edge of my known world. We heard travellers' tales of aliens at Byron, psychics, hippies. I never thought I'd be opening a literary festival here. The only things they read in Byron in those days were tea leaves and tarot cards. I do have one family connection with Byron. My uncle, Lance Robertson, was for many years manager of the Commonwealth Bank when it was a small fishing village. And he's quite famous. There was a plaque to him up at the RSL Club, with good reason, because it was in that wowzerish era when the pubs had to close at 6 p.m., famous 6 o'clock swill, and which was particularly irksome to the trawlerman who came in after 6 with a raging thirst. Well, he was bank manager, and so the local advisor, he wasn't a lawyer, he was a bush lawyer, and they asked him for advice. So he combed the statutes of New South Wales and hit upon an obscure little law in the New South Wales State Government Railways Act that permitted the bar at a railway station to remain open so long as there was a train in the station. So he conspired with the local station master to ensure that there always was a train parked at Byron. And so the railway bar could remain open all hours. And that's where he did his business. That's where the Commonwealth Bank operated, from the railway bar. You want a new trawler? Fine, have another beer and I'll fix you a good interest rate. The legend, of course, was that these were super prime loans. Not one of those loans went bad in the days when there were plenty of fish in the bay and the banks were safe.